Okay, so a cartoon is a type of visual persuasive piece. And one of the main techniques that it uses is known as satire. Often cartoonists use what is known as caricatures, which are pictorial representations of people that exaggerate physical features or actions or gestures that are typically used by a person in order to make a point. Aside from caricatures, there are a number of elements to a cartoon that need to be considered if you're going to analyse it effectively. So one of those is colour and how that is used to, how that might be used symbolically. It might be able to be interpreted to represent a particular idea or a particular emotion. So colour is really important. Something else to think about as well is the actual placement of objects and where it is that they're actually positioned within the cartoon itself. Something else to consider too is the actual sizing of particular objects, of figures, of all of the elements that have been put into the cartoon, because that may emphasise, it may minimise, it may dominate a particular cartoon, and all of that has been done intentionally by the cartoonist for a particular reason. The cartoonist might actually use symbols of some kind that might be commonly known to represent particular ideas or particular people or particular emotions in some way. The other thing to be mindful of when looking at cartoons is the intended meanings behind things. So when a particular image is used, what does that make you think of? What are the associated meanings? And we call those connotations, which really just means the associated meanings or the connected ideas, connected suggestions that could be meant by the use of that particular picture, that particular image. Within a cartoon, there may also be the use of persuasive techniques that you might find in a written piece. So you may find an example of an emotional appeal, or you may find an example of something that is more metaphorical that is presented within the cartoon. And those are things that you can also comment on in your analysis. So with all of this in mind, what we're going to do is have a look at the cartoon that is on the front page of our issues analysis booklet this year. And the issue that we're studying is Australians behaving badly overseas and what the implications of that are. So if we have a look then at this first cartoon, immediately we can notice that there are a number of elements that go to make up this particular image. So there is the title of the piece, which is in the top left corner, obviously. There is this really dominating image of the balaclava that is off-centre, but is certainly what draws our attention most predominantly because it is the biggest object in the whole piece. That being said, we need to still consider the background or the landscape of the piece, which is presented by all of the houses here, and this sense of perspective in that the house is smaller to the left of the actual piece, and that allows the house with the balaclava around it to be the focal point or the centre of the image itself. You also have this scrum of attention down here in the bottom left corner, which is something that is secondary to the piece. And then right down the bottom of the right corner over here, there is some sort of comment being made about what's actually taking place and the issue. So let's start with the actual title itself then. So we have this dubbed title that has since become a really common expression of Barley Boy, which came about sort of for two reasons. Number one, there's a sort of the use of alliteration, okay, that it's a clever sort of title to give this young boy who's been caught overseas, caught in Bali, in possession of drugs. But it also marks the fact that he needs to have his identity protected or concealed in some way because he is a minor, and because for privacy reasons that his name is not allowed to be identified. So with this actual title itself comes some infamy. You know that this boy has lost his identity in some way, and he is now just Barley Boy and everything that goes with that. The title itself is actually something that seems fairly commonplace and certainly something that's very ordinary in itself. Arriving home is something that happens every single day to thousands, millions of people in this country and certainly worldwide, where travellers make their way home after their trips. So the irony of this is that this seemingly innocent event, which really for most people would be marked with celebration and joy, is instead overshadowed by this craziness, this chaotic exposure that he's receiving while he comes back home, and it is a very different experience for him. What you also can mark too is the seeming calmness of the actual day that is presented. In the colours you can actually see in the image, the sky is presented as this very pale, calm, quiet blue, which seems in direct contrast to the chaos that is going on down the bottom here with the media attention. So there is a juxtaposition here. And I guess this in itself is maybe hinting at something of what the cartoonist's contention is, that all of this attention is out of place. All of this scrutiny from the media is unnatural and unnecessary in some way. So let's then have a look at this landscape that's presented to us by the cartoonist. And if we see there are 1, 2, 3, 4 houses in the background that make up this street scene, if you like. And looking at them, they are all very, very similar in size, in shape, in colour, in the materials that they're actually made from. And all of this is working to suggest perhaps that, this was an area that was built up at the same time, and there is a lack of personal ownership or personal identity of the people who actually live in these houses. If you consider the actual yards themselves, they're incredibly bare and lacking any sort of real attention or love. If you look at this yard that we see, very limited yard that we see of the house belonging to Barley Boy and his family, their yard looks almost exactly identical to the yard beside them, I guess we can assume. The only thing in the backyard of this entire home is this single clothesline. So all of this is suggesting perhaps that this is a lower socioeconomic area where people don't have the interest or the money to really make their own personal mark on their homes. Okay, so let's have a look now at this image that really is dominating on every level the entire cartoon. So we have this enlarged balaclava. And when you think of a balaclava, it is a typical symbol of crime. And the purpose really of a balaclava is to hide or conceal one's identity. If you look at the balaclava through the size and the shape of it, it is almost exactly identical to the balaclava that's being worn by the boy himself. So it's connecting these two things, connecting the person with the place, which is perhaps suggesting that not only is the family home connected to this boy, but that in some way the family has been tainted or tarnished by the actions of their son. There is also, though, this sense of irony, because while a balaclava is initially used as a way to try and hide who you are so that you can't be identified or can't be recognized, in reality, this young boy has almost now come to be associated with the balaclava. So it's now almost a marker that identifies him, and it's something that will cloud or will cover how he is seen, certainly in the immediate future and potentially long term as well. So you could say there's a comment too being made by the cartoonist here about privacy, and in this attempt to maintain some privacy about who he is and what's happened, that he's now actually become known and will remain known for this activity that or these actions that he's done while overseas. It's really interesting too to think about how this actual drawing has been put together, because the positioning of the balaclava's eye-opening, if you like, has been quite squarely placed where these two windows are, which almost creates the illusion of the windows becoming the eyes, and as though they are scanning the scene in front of them. The windows themselves are squarely looking not just at the boy as he runs towards the house, but also what's taking place down in this left corner and who is part of that, and sort of looking at the attention that it's receiving, and the actual positioning of those windows draw the viewer's eyes from the balaclava and from the house down to this corner to actually look at the scene that's happening out on the street in full view of anybody who happened to be walking past. And so it's at this point, I guess, that we can see a second question or challenge being asked by the cartoonist. So the first point, I guess, being made is about identity and about privacy and the right to privacy that this young person has, perhaps, and also how the attention being paid towards him is perhaps going to deny him the opportunity of ever being known as anybody but the Barley Boy. So in a sense, he's going to be forever marked by this action, this choice that he made when he was very young. The second point that this cartoonist is making, though, is the sort of attention that he's receiving. And there seems to be a fairly strong point being made about the media. So if you have a look at the scene that's taking place in this bottom left corner, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, something down here suggests 5, 6, 7, 8 microphones or cameras, which are very powerful symbols of media presence and media attention being placed on this young person. And the way that they are totally surrounding him suggests that there is no escape for him, and that this attention that he's receiving is incredibly full on. If you follow the actual position of the cameras themselves, every single one of them is trained squarely on this main image of this young boy trying to get into his house and trying to, we can assume, move on with his life and forget this horrific experience that he's been involved in. If we have a look at the actual figure that is alongside him, you have an adult presence, running alongside him, who has a cap on which has become associated with, not to the extent of a balaclava, but certainly an attempt to shield or hide one's identity a little bit, to create a cover or a barrier that's going to prevent somebody from being easily recognizable. And you also have this arm that is coming around, holding onto this young boy's shoulder, which is a typical gesture of protection, one of trying to save him or to shade or shield him from all of the attention that he's receiving. And all of this is really emphasizing the sense of entrapment that he would be feeling with all of this attention placed on him. Further emphasizing this sense of scrutiny or entrapment is the actual position that they're depicted in. So with the arms and legs outstretched, you get the very real sense that they are running. So there is this desperate attempt to avoid this attention in some way, and they are trying to escape as quickly as they can. There is also a sense of irony in that while there is intense media scrutiny on display here, there is not one example of an onlooker paying any attention to what's happening. No neighbours from nearby are paying any attention. Nobody is out watching what's happening. Nobody is on the street, gawking or looking at this boy. So the only people interested, this piece is suggesting, is the media themselves, and that they are creating this circus that is surrounding this young boy, when really nobody else seems to be particularly interested in what's taking place or who this young person is. And if you come back to have a look at where this actual balaclava is positioned, you might notice that it's actually starting to starting to encroach onto the actual footpath itself. Now, the footpath is a public, something that represents public ownership of a community. It's something that is controlled or maintained by the council on behalf of the entire community, whereas the actual house itself is privately owned. So by this balaclava coming out from the private house onto the footpath, you could perhaps suggest that this matter, which is essentially a very private one, has been shifted and has been moved into the public realm by the media themselves. And I think it would be fair to suggest that there is some questioning of the media at the very least, or, an indictment being placed on the media for their handling of this particular case and how closely they've gotten involved, which is, which has been something that perhaps the public themselves haven't wanted. So without any onlookers, essentially this is an issue that's been beaten up by the media and received more attention than perhaps it should have received. Interestingly, on top of each of these houses is, the aerial and what looks to be a satellite dish. And so perhaps this too is making a comment about the fact that news and images saturate our lives and our environments so quickly and so prominently these days that even if you are not interested in something, you are almost forced to pay attention to it. And these people would probably know, those who live in these houses would know who Bali Boy is, would have heard of the term Bali Boy, would probably know about the issue, but may not actually know that the person involved in the actual event lives nearby. And there's certainly this idea that that there's a lack of interest. So I guess we've really looked at this image in quite a lot of detail at the moment, but there's just one other thing that we really need to draw our attention to and think about what perhaps the meaning behind this little inclusion is. And it's really easy to miss it if because of everything else that is dominating the cartoon itself. But right down here in this right bottom hand corner, there is this very brief statement, but it is certainly very, very important, and it casts another perspective on this whole issue. So there is something going on here about privacy and identity, and how this young person will perceive himself and how he will be perceived by others. There is certainly something being said about media attention and their involvement in creating stories and creating notoriety or a sense of celebrity out of particular incidents. But this statement down here raises another issue that is attached to this. And what we really need to do is zoom in and pay close attention to it. So, and I really need to apologise. Sorry about how pixelated it is when we try to zoom in, but you should still be able to read or make out what the actual words themselves are. So this little caption right at the bottom, seemingly insignificant, says another souvenir of Bali. And those word choices are very, very particular and specific. So we really need to think about this use of the word another and what that actually means. So it really is suggesting here that this is not the first example of somebody breaking the law and behaving badly whilst overseas, and more specifically whilst they are in Bali. So there is some suggestion that this is becoming common, or this is typical Australian behaviour. There is nothing surprising about this. And if there is nothing surprising about this behaviour, well, that in itself is concerning and certainly embarrassing for Australians. The use of the word souvenir is also really, really targeted, and it's certainly no accident that it's been used. So when you think about the word souvenir, it is something that is typically a reminder of somebody wanting to keep a reminder of something pleasant that's happened while they've been away, a memento or a memory that they can bring back with them, that they will then be able to look back fondly over that time that they spent away. So with all of these really positive connotations for the word souvenir, this has certainly been used sarcastically by the cartoonist to make a point about the memories that Australians are bringing back with them, but also it makes a point about the impression that Australians are leaving behind in Bali, whilst they are over there. And it really is intended to embarrass or shame Australians, and particularly the people who are looking at this cartoon, really questioning them about what kind of impression is being left and what sort of damage is being done to the reputation of Australians by these tourists who seem to be constantly getting themselves into trouble, breaking laws, and being generally disrespectful of another culture or another country's legal system. So I guess then this cartoon really has a number of different issues or contentions that it's dealing with. Firstly, you have this idea of privacy and identity, and whether this person involved in this event has, first of all, the right to dealing with this in a private way. Does he deserve to be known so widely for this action that he's committed, given the fact that it was a relatively that there is a sense of it being a minor offence in some ways. And while this labelling and attention placed on him, could potentially be harmful or damaging for him, quite detrimentally, there is also some risk suggested here of this person, becoming known positively in some way, as much as there is a danger of him being negatively known for this event and for this behaviour, this choice that he's made. There is also the danger of glamorising or raising him to the point of celebrity status and giving him this notoriety or infamy that could give an inflated sense of achievement in some warped way, and that is dangerous and almost a worse thing to happen in society. As a second point, there seems to be a very strong point being made about the media and their involvement in this particular case, and the role that they play, and how irresponsible they can be if they turn something into being overly significant or to the point of it becoming chaotic or circus-like in some way. The portrayal of the media in this particular cartoon certainly suggests that it has been excessive and that it is almost unnatural and unfounded in some way if the public attention doesn't match with the actual attention that the media is giving to it. And thirdly, there is definitely a very targeted and a very focused comment being made on Australians, and in particular Australian travellers, and their behaviour whilst they're overseas, and this seemingly increasing trend to be mischievous, to misbehave, and to, in extreme cases, break the law whilst they are overseas. And, the question being raised then about how this could be affecting the reputation of Australians more widely in some ways. Okay, so with this, we've gone through a very detailed analysis of how to approach cartoons, that it's really important that you consider the image in its entire form, and that you don't allow yourself to be totally consumed by just one element of the actual picture of the cartoon, but that you consider each of the elements and how they are contributing to the overall contention, the overall ideas or issues that are being raised and commented on within the piece. So once you have identified what the issues are, once you've identified the contention, and once you've been able to really explore how this cartoon has been constructed to create a sense of meaning and to create a purpose behind it, you then need to consider, well, what is the effect on the reader? How are they being positioned to think about the issue itself or the people involved in it? How are they being positioned to feel? Or are they being positioned to do something? Is there a call to action that is implied within the piece? And once you have been able to consider all of those factors, you are then ready to begin writing your analysis and explain exactly how this visual persuasive piece is being used to persuade the viewer of a particular viewpoint. And then you're done.